3 months after the cancer took her husband's ability to walk, Loretta Mae Sutton's 2 sons decided, within the same week, in 2 separate conversations that felt rehearsed, that they could not be the ones to help. The woman who moved in next door was 41 years old and had just lost everything. She did not know his name yet. She would learn it the morning she saw him drop a full pitcher of sweet tea off the side of his porch and sit there in the wet watching it drain into the boards because his right hand had stopped cooperating and nobody was home to see. She picked up the pitcher. She went inside and got paper towels. She said, "Let me get that." He said, "You don't have to." She said, "I know." She did that every day for 14 months. He did not know yet what she would find inside his workshop. She did not know yet what finding it would cost her. Calvin James Sutton had been a Finnish carpenter for 38 years. He worked out of a double-wide garage behind his house on Fenwick Road in a town called Sully, Louisiana, where the summers came in like something you had to survive and the winters barely showed up at all. The garage smelled like sawdust and linseed oil and something older underneath, the way old wood does when it has been worked and reworked until it holds the smell of every pair of hands that ever touched it. He had built furniture for people all over Ascension Parish. Dining tables, bedroom sets, bookshelves fitted floor to ceiling in houses where the families had been there 3 generations. He did not advertise. He did not have a website. People found him the way people always find the ones who are good at something. They heard it from somebody who had a table he built in 1994 that still had not moved a single joint. He charged fair. He never overcharged a widow or a young couple and never explained to anyone that he was doing it. He just knew what a thing cost to make, and he charged that and he let the rest go. He made $16 an hour for the first 10 years, and then he started charging by the piece, and it was better. Not wealthy. He was never wealthy, but the kind of steady that lets you sleep at night, which is its own category of rich that nobody talks about enough. He and Loretta Mae had been married 41 years. She had died of a heart attack on a Wednesday morning in April, hanging laundry on the line behind the house. Calvin found her when he came in from the workshop for lunch. He did not talk about it much after. What he said, when he said anything, was that she had been in the middle of doing something ordinary, and that was the part he could not get past. Not the loss. The ordinariness of how it happened. The sheets were still in the basket, half hung. He kept working for 4 years after that. The cancer started in his lung and moved to his spine in the 2nd year, and by the 3rd year, the nerve damage in his right hand had gotten bad enough that fine work was mostly gone. He could still rough cut. He could still measure and mark and set a nail. But the dovetail joints, the inlay work, the small, patient things that took the hand he had trained for 38 years, those started failing him, and every time they did, he would stand at the bench for a long time, looking at what he had not been able to do. His sons were named Brett and Tommy. Both of them had grown up watching him in that garage. Brett was the older one. He had left Sully at 23 for Baton Rouge, where he worked in insurance and lived in a subdivision with his wife, Carla, and their 2 kids and a lawn he hired somebody to cut. He called his father every Sunday. The calls ran about 12 minutes. He asked about the weather. He asked if Calvin was eating. He said, "I'll get down there soon, Dad," and he said it the same way every Sunday for 6 years, meaning it in the way people mean things when they have not yet been asked to prove them. Tommy was the younger one. Tommy stayed in Louisiana longer, which is different from staying close. He moved to Shreveport at 26 for a woman who became his wife and then became his ex-wife, and he built a life out of the pieces afterward, which left him without much left over for anything that needed regular tending. He sent his father $250 every month. He had been doing it for 3 years. He never called when he sent it. The money was the whole conversation. Calvin would text back, "Thanks, son." Tommy would send a thumbs up. That was it. Neither of them was a bad son. That is important. Neither of them was cruel or indifferent, the way people are when they do not love somebody. They loved their father the way that distance teaches you to love. in scheduled intervals, from behind a phone screen, with the comfortable feeling that someone else is probably closer and handling the daily part. The problem was, there was no one else closer. There had been Loretta May, and then there was not. The cancer went to his spine in the spring of his 3rd year with it. And by summer Calvin could walk with a cane, and by fall he needed the cane and a hand on the wall, and by December he was using the wheelchair in the house and the walker for short distances outside. The oncologist in Baton Rouge told him straight. The disease was progressing, the treatment options had narrowed, and he needed to think seriously about what his living situation was going to look like in 6 months, and then in a year, and then after that. Calvin came home from that appointment and sat in the kitchen for 45 minutes without turning on a light. He called Brett first. Brett answered on the 3rd ring. Calvin told him what the doctor had said. He kept it brief, the way he kept most things, because that was how he was built. There was a pause. In the background, Calvin could hear one of the grandkids asking something and Carla answering. And then Brett said, "Dad, I want to help, I really do. But Carla's mom is having her hip done in February, and we're already stretched thin, and the kids have school stuff, and I don't think we can take on a full situation right now. But I'm going to look into options. There are really good facilities now, Dad. Like, really good, not like the old days." Calvin said, "Okay, Brett." He called Tommy next. Tommy picked up on the 1st ring and said, "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" Which meant he had seen the caller ID and known this was not the regular Sunday call. Calvin told him. Tommy was quiet for longer than Brett had been. Then he said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm in a bad spot right now, financially. The overtime dried up and I've got the car payment and I can't take on anything else. I want to, I swear I want to, maybe in a few months when things level out." He said it like he believed it, which he probably did. Calvin said, "It's okay, Tommy." He set the phone down on the kitchen table. The kitchen was dim. He had not turned the lights on when he came home, and he had not turned them on during the calls either. He sat in the same chair he had eaten breakfast in for 27 years, and looked out the window at the workshop and did not move for a long time. His neighbor across the fence, a woman named Patricia Elaine Odom, had lived in the small yellow house on the left side of his property for 19 years and waved at him every morning from her driveway without ever once coming over. She was the one who called Brett when she had not seen Calvin's kitchen light come on by 9 o'clock. Brett called Calvin. Calvin answered and said he was fine. He had just been sitting in the dark thinking. The new neighbor moved in 6 weeks after that. The house on the right side had been empty for 8 months, ever since the Blanchet family sold it and moved to Texas. Calvin had watched the moving trucks come and go from his kitchen window. He had not gone over to introduce himself. He was 71 years old, widowed, and sick, and the effort of being a new acquaintance had grown beyond him. She arrived on a Thursday in late January with a small moving truck. She drove herself and 2 men she had hired through an app for 4 hours. Her name was Sandra Elaine Graves. She was 41 years old, and she had arrived in Sully, Louisiana, with 11 boxes, a bed frame, a folding table, 3 chairs, and approximately nothing else, which is what happens when a marriage ends fast and a bankruptcy follows it close. She had been a bookkeeper for 17 years, the last 9 of them for a construction company in Slidell, run by a man named Doug Pruitt, who had turned out to be the kind of man who runs 2 sets of books and then, when the second set becomes a problem, suggests to the IRS that the woman who processed the numbers was the one who designed them. She had not designed them. She had not known about them, not the full shape of them, until the federal inquiry started and the lawyer Doug hired turned out to also be protecting Doug. She had spent 14 months and most of her savings clearing her name. She came out the other side with a clean record, a bankruptcy from the legal fees, a divorce from a husband who had decided the whole ordeal was more than he had signed up for, and a rental house in a town where nobody knew her. She was not looking for anyone to know her. She was not looking for anything except quiet and a place where the math of her monthly expenses finally worked out. She noticed Calvin the second week. He was on the porch in the morning, the way he was every morning, in the wooden chair he had built himself. She did not know that yet, with his coffee and his right hand resting in his lap at an angle that was not quite right. He held the mug in his left hand and did not use his right one, and she noticed that without meaning to, because she was good at noticing things that did not line up. The picture happened on a Friday. She was pulling out of her driveway at 7 in the morning when she saw him at the porch railing with a glass pitcher of sweet tea, and then, without any particular drama, the pitcher was on the porch boards, and he was sitting down in his chair, and the tea was running down through the gaps in the boards to the ground below. He did not look embarrassed. He looked tired, the way people look when something has happened that they have been expecting, and now it has happened, and they are mostly just relieved it is over. She parked the car. She went inside her house and got the roll of paper towels under her sink. She came back out and went up his porch steps without being invited. "Let me get that," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said. She mopped up the tea. She took the pitcher and rinsed it in his kitchen sink. He had not told her she could come inside, but he had not told her she could not, and there was a quality to the silence that read as permission, and she dried it and set it on the counter. She said, "Do you have someone coming today?" "No," he said. "Do you need anything from the store?" He thought about it. "I was going to order groceries. The delivery's been running late." "I'm going to Rouse's on my way back," she said. "Write me a list." He looked at her for a long time. He had the eyes of a man who had been taking accurate stock of people for 7 decades and did not need much time to do it. Then he went to the counter and found a pen and the back of an envelope and wrote in slow, careful print because his right hand was having a better morning than most. She took the list. She bought the groceries. She came back an hour later and put them on the kitchen counter and gave him the change down to the cent. She did not stay. She had somewhere to be. She did not have anywhere to be. But she could see that he was not a man who would accept help comfortably, and she knew from her own experience that the best thing you can do for a proud person is give them room to pretend they are not being helped. She came back the next morning. She knocked twice, the way you knock when you are not sure you are welcome. He opened the door and said, "I didn't ask you to come." She said, "Do you need anything?" He said, "I need to get to the pharmacy by 10. She said, "I'll take you." He did not say thank you. He went to get his jacket. That was the whole negotiation. She drove him to the pharmacy and waited in the car and drove him home, and that was all. The day after that, she checked in through the screen door. The day after that, he had a list ready without her asking. By the second week, it was simply the thing that happened in the mornings. The way a lot of things become simply the thing that happens when nobody makes a formal decision about them. She had her own life to manage. She had picked up remote bookkeeping work for 3 small businesses in Baton Rouge, enough to cover rent and groceries with a little left over. And she worked from her folding table in the morning hours and kept to herself in the afternoons. She was not there to be anyone's anything. She was there to be nowhere for a while. But she kept coming back. In March, she noticed the ramp he had tried to build off the side porch to make it easier to get the wheelchair out to the workshop. It was rough, the angle was wrong, and the edge boards were not secured right, and it would have been a problem in the rain. She did not say anything to him about it. She went to the hardware store and bought the materials and came back on a Saturday afternoon and pulled the whole thing apart and rebuilt it correctly. He watched from the doorway. She could feel him watching. When she finished and packed her tools back into the small red bag she kept them in, he said from the doorway, "Where did you learn to do that?" "My grandfather," she said. "He couldn't afford to hire people, so he taught me instead." There was a pause. Then he said, "Come in. I'll make you coffee." She came in. He made the coffee left-handed, slowly, and she did not offer to help because she could see that making the coffee was not about the coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, and he asked her where she was from, and she told him Slidell. And he asked what brought her to Sully, and she told him the short version, which was that she had needed a change. He did not push. He drank his coffee and looked out the window at the workshop. "You can go look at it," he said. "At what?" "The shop. You keep looking at it through the window." She had not known she was doing that. She said, "I don't want to intrude. I said you can go look." She went. The workshop was something. 2 workbenches running the length of both long walls, tools hung on pegboard with the outlines drawn in marker, so you could see at a glance what was missing. Chisels organized by width, hand planes on a shelf above the east bench, 7 of them, oldest to newest. The oldest one, with a handle worn smooth in a shape that was not quite his hand, probably his father's. In the back corner, a bandsaw and a table saw and a thickness planer, all of them old, all of them kept up in a way that meant he had treated his equipment the way he treated his work. On the back bench, half finished, was a rocking chair. It was the kind of piece you stop in front of. The proportions were right in a way that took experience to understand. The curve of the back, the angle of the rockers, the way the spindles had been turned, so they were not quite uniform. Each one a fraction different from the last, so the whole thing had the variation of a thing made by hand instead of stamped out. The wood was white oak. The joints were dry fit, not glued yet, waiting. She stood in front of it for a while. When she came back to the kitchen, she said, "That rocking chair." "I know," he said. "Is it for someone?" He looked into his mug. "It was supposed to be. I've been trying to finish it for 7 months. The small work gets harder." He said it flat, not asking for anything. She said, "What specifically?" "The spindle finishing, the final fitting. My right hand doesn't have the..." He stopped. "It doesn't have what it used to have," she said. "Show me." He looked at her. "Not now," she said. "Whenever. Show me what it needs and I'll do the part your hand can't." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You know woodworking?" "Some. My grandfather again. I'm not trained. But I follow instruction well." He nodded once, very slow. That was the agreement. The next Saturday, he was in the workshop at 2 in the afternoon, and she came over and he stood at the bench and told her what to do, and she did it. He corrected her when she was wrong. He did not soften the corrections. She did not need them softened. She had spent 17 years taking accurate numbers from imprecise people, and she knew how to hear a correction without taking it personally. They worked on the chair for 4 Saturdays. On the 5th Saturday, they finished it. He ran his left hand along the back rail and pressed on the joints and sat in it once, carefully, and it did not move. He said, "That's a good chair," she said. "You built it. We finished it." She did not say anything to that. She started cleaning up the bench. Saturdays became the shape of things. She brought food sometimes, not as charity, but as convenience. She was cooking anyway, and it was not harder to cook for 2. He made the coffee. They sat at the table and he told her about the work he had done over 38 years and the people he had made things for. A woman in Gonzales who had him build a crib for her first grandchild and then called him back 6 years later for a twin bed when the child grew out of it, and then called him again when the child went to college to make a desk. He had followed that child's whole life in furniture. She told him about the bankruptcy and the case, the way she told it plainly, the facts without decoration, because she was past the point of being ashamed of it and not yet at the point of it being a story she told casually. He listened. He did not give advice. When she was done, he said, "The man who set you up for it, did he get caught?" "He pled guilty to 3 counts, she said. "He's out in 4 years. Calvin made a sound that was not quite a word. Then he said, "That's a thin amount of justice." "Yes," she said. "It is." He nodded. He drank his coffee. That was the whole exchange, and it was the right amount. She drove him to his appointments. She picked up his prescriptions. When the physical therapist recommended the handrail in the bathroom, she put it in herself over 2 hours on a Tuesday morning while he sat in the hallway and told her she had the drill angle wrong. He was right about the angle. She redid it. The disease was not stopping. That was not a surprise to anyone. The oncologist in Baton Rouge changed the treatment protocol in the fall, and in November Calvin had a month of bad days where getting out of the chair in the kitchen was a project. He did not complain. He described it accurately when she asked. "Bad day. The back." And she took that as information and adjusted accordingly. She brought food. She checked in twice a day. She did not make it larger than it was. Brett called on Sundays. The calls were still about 12 minutes. He started asking about the neighbor around October, once Tommy had mentioned her. Brett said, "Is she being compensated?" Calvin said, "She's a neighbor, Brett." Brett said, "I'm just asking." Calvin said, "I know you are." The call ended on time. Tommy drove up from Shreveport once in November and spent 2 days. He fixed the gutter on the front of the house and took his father to lunch, and they watched football on Saturday night. He shook Sandra's hand when he met her and said, "Thank you for looking in on him." She said, "Of course." He drove back to Shreveport Sunday afternoon, and the house went quiet again. She found the lockbox in March. She had been in the workshop getting a hammer she needed for something in her own house, which was now something she did without asking, because they had passed that point months ago, and she had pulled open the bottom drawer of the east bench to find it, and the lockbox was there. She was not looking for it. She put the lockbox back and found the hammer in the drawer above it and did not mention it. A week later, he asked her to come to the workshop. He was at the east bench. He did not say anything right away. He opened the bottom drawer and took out the lockbox. He put it on the bench between them. "I want to show you something," he said. He had a key on his key ring. He opened it. Inside was a ledger, old, cloth-covered, the kind you do not find in office supply stores anymore. He opened it to the first page. It was a list of names, 46 of them, a name, a date, and a dollar amount next to each one. The amounts ranged from $200 to $800. The dates ran from 1991 to 2019. She looked at the list and then at him. "People who couldn't pay full price," he said, "or who needed the piece and I could see they needed it, and I didn't want to make it hard for them." He turned a page. I kept track. She turned through the pages slowly. A family in 1994 that he had built a full bedroom set for, at cost, because the father had been laid off and the daughter was starting college in the fall, and he did not want them sleeping on the floor in her dorm room. A woman in 2001 who needed a casket display stand for her husband's funeral and did not have the money, and he had built it in a night and charged her nothing, and she had wept in his driveway. A young man in 2008 who had asked him to build a workbench and paid him in installments over 8 months, and who had since become a contractor in Prairieville and sent Calvin 2 referrals every year since. She turned to the last page. There were 2 things in the back of the ledger. The first was a letter. She read it without being told to. It was addressed to her. It said he had watched her that first morning she came up his porch steps with the paper towels, and he had known something in the first 30 seconds that he had spent the last 14 months confirming. It said he was not a sentimental man, and he was not writing this to be sentimental. It said that after Loretta May died, he had kept working because the work was the only thing that ran on a track he recognized, and he had kept the ledger because it was the only record of the part of the work he was proudest of, and he had not shown it to Brett or Tommy because they would have asked him why he had not charged full price, and he would not have been able to explain it to them in a way they would understand. He had shown it to her because she would understand it, because she was the first person since Loretta May who had done something without being asked, and without explaining why, and without needing the explanation to go anywhere. The second thing was a document. A single folded page from a title company in Baton Rouge. She opened it. The house on Fenwick Road, his name as grantor, her name as grantee. The deed had been prepared and notarized 4 months ago. She set it down on the bench. She did not pick it up again. He said, "I have a will. The boys know what's in it. I talked to a lawyer in October. The house is separate. The house is already done." She said, "Calvin, I know what you're going to say. You don't. You're going to say you can't take it." She was quiet. He said, "You already have. You've been taking care of this house for 14 months. You fixed the ramp and the handrail and the gutter and every other thing I couldn't get to. You drove me to Baton Rouge 11 times. He picked up the coffee mug she had brought him when she came over and set it down again. The house needs somebody who's going to take care of it. You know how to take care of things. I watched you learn to take care of things." He paused. "Loretta May would have liked you." She stood at the bench for a long time. She looked at the chair in the corner, the one they had finished together, the one he had built for 7 months until his hands stopped cooperating. She had sat in it once and it moved like something alive. She looked at the rocking chair, and she looked at the ledger, and she looked at the list of 46 names, and she looked at this man standing at his bench with his left hand flat on the wood and his right hand in his pocket, because that was where he kept it, when he did not want anyone to see that it was not cooperating. She thought about the 2 sons who had said they couldn't. She understood why they couldn't. She understood the distance and the finances and the life already built somewhere else that does not have room for the thing nobody planned for. She had been the thing nobody planned for in her own family's story. She knew what it cost, but she also knew what it cost to show up. The 20 minutes earlier out of bed every morning, the appointments rescheduled, the grocery lists carried in her head alongside her own, the Saturday afternoons smelling like sawdust, learning how to hold a carving tool from a man who had held one for 38 years. She knew what it cost, and she had paid it without keeping track, which meant she had paid it because she meant to. She picked up the deed. She held it for a moment. Then she folded it back along its crease and set it down gently on top of the ledger. "Okay," she said. He nodded. He did not say anything else. He turned back to the bench and picked up a piece of sandpaper and started working the edge of something he had been sanding when she came in. She stood there a minute longer. Then she picked up her hammer and went home. That night she sat at her folding table and did not open her laptop. She looked at the wall where she had not yet hung anything because she had not decided if this was a place she was staying. She thought about the folding table she had bought for $60 because she did not know yet if she could afford a real one. She thought about the 11 boxes and the bed frame and the 3 chairs she had arrived with. She thought about her grandfather's hands, teaching hers. She thought about 46 names in a ledger. She thought about the chair and the way Calvin had run his left hand along the back rail and pressed on the joints and sat in it once, carefully, and it had not moved. If this story made you think about someone who showed up for another person when they had no particular reason to, send it to them. Not a text, not a like. Send it the way you'd want something sent to you if you had ever been the one on the porch in the dark, waiting for the kitchen light to come on. And if this story made you think about somebody you haven't called, not your excuse for why you couldn't, just the person's, then you already know what to do. Here is the question this story leaves on the table. Calvin left his sons their share of the estate. He left the house to the woman next door. His youngest son, Tommy, had been sending $250 every month for 3 years, which is not nothing. That money helped cover the prescriptions and the groceries and the taxi rides Calvin took before Sandra started driving him. Without the $250 a month, some of those months would have been harder. Does the money count? Not legally, not in the will, but does it count in the way you are counting right now, sitting wherever you are, deciding what you think Calvin should have done? I want to read what you think. Leave it below.